I don't even want to stand over there. Just keep thinking of that prophet from New York. I used to let the mic smoke. Now I slam it when I'm done and make sure it's broke. I do believe this has been the best conference morning I've ever had. Praise be to God for speaking to us this morning. If you all will allow me, I'm going to borrow 15 minutes of your lunchtime. These folks are going to come and set the dais for us, and then we're going to have a panel with these brothers. I don't know what I'm going to ask them, but we're going to get together and talk just a little bit more. So thank you guys so much. Excellent. We kind of titled this panel, We the Church, because we thought that in sort of trying to push back against tribalism and the sort of left-right dichotomies and in trying to have a language that unites us, we were hoping we would arrive at a greater sense of we to inform sort of our identity as God's people. And that would have some implications, as I think were drawn out in your talks, about our sort of political engagement. So maybe just to put this in a quick question, I'll start with Mark and Justin and Russ, who spoke this morning. How do we develop a deeper, greater sense of we as we come into the public square, as we think about being a pilgrim community made up of tribes and nations and language and so on? What are some thoughts about how that should inform our public engagement?
Well, I think first and foremost that's good. Check. I think first and foremost that's there's a theological issue underneath that, where the Apostle Paul said in the book of Colossians, "Here there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, barbarian, Scythian, but Christ is all and in all." And so I think part of the problem of our present cultural dynamics is it reveals a weak foundation in terms of our understanding of who our identity is and how the church is shaping or is not shaping that identity. As a result, someone's going to shape that identity, and often it's not the church either shaping it in how we think, how we approach our views of others, and then even the language that we use to try and communicate, this is who we are. And I think it's easy for the gravitational pull to kind of go the other direction so easily. And so I think regularly reinforcing that through faithful teaching, catechizing of people, the kind of songs that we sing together, and the kind of relationships that we have are all really important. I think it makes Sunday morning a really critical battle zone, not just for good and evil, but for identity. Who are we as a people? And Sunday is a regular gathering of this is who we are.
Yeah, we'll just say when it comes to kind of unity and getting folks together, we got to realize, one of the issues that we have with our political landscape is that there's no common ground. Like people, you can't have a real discussion with somebody who you can't find common ground. Well, Christians, although we're all over the spectrum politically, we have more common ground than we could ever ask for, right? We have the same Great Commission, same great requirement. All those things. And so we have common ground. What we've tried to do is just emphasize that common ground. There's so much talk about what divides us, but we have the same mission. What else, what more could you need? And I think the fact that we're spread out almost makes this the perfect thing. Like, how does our political landscape heal if people that have all this common ground who are on both sides can't come together? And so I think if we emphasize that common ground and see that maybe we're placed on these two sides for a reason, and maybe we're the key to kind of healing, then I think we start to see how it all comes together.
I think I would say it would be different in terms of all of us together as a church and the way that sometimes this happens individually. So as a church, I think we have to constantly be reminding ourselves who we are in Christ and who we belong to. And then I think at the personal level, often God does that for us, often through suffering. By taking whatever idols it is that we've put around us and taking them off of us. And so I think when it comes to that question of who we are and who we identify with, learning to love Jesus, to follow Jesus, and to recognize. I remember reading a couple years ago an evolutionary biologist who said that Jesus was not a very good mammal. And he said every mammal knows that you protect your own and you hate your enemies. And when Jesus teaches the opposite, he's not just teaching something that's kind of countercultural, it's counter-mammalian. It's just completely not natural. And he's exactly right in the sense that we're living in a fallen universe where that is exactly what happens. I had a pastor say to me the other day, he was talking about some of the political tensions in his church, and said one of his church members said, we've tried turn the other cheek. That doesn't work. We've got to try something different. Well, of course, it depends on what the word work means. The Sermon on the Mount doesn't work in a Darwinian survival of the fittest sort of a way. You have to have a longer term of trillions and trillions of years. And so we have to be reminding ourselves, I think, of that all the time.
Jonathan, what questions would you have for these brothers? You listening to, she's a very astute listener. You think about these things a lot. What question would you have for these brothers?
Is that because you're out of questions? And
I am.
Trying to pass the buck? But it looks so gracious of you to give me the opportunity to ask the questions. I don't know, it occurs to me as I was listening to your talk, Justin, we are in a tough moment. I think of Washington and Adams talking about this form of government we have works among a virtuous people. That is to say, it's not going to work among an unvirtuous people. And I think in many respects we are experiencing that. So you see people on both sides saying, conservative side, I'm not sure I can shake hands with my party any longer here. And you have people on the Democrat side saying, I'm not sure I can shake hands with my party here. I feel stuck in both directions. Why? In part, I would say largely, we're moving more and more to an unvirtuous society, at least by some measures. What advice, brother, would you give for Christians thinking through the various ethical issues of working within a party even when it seems to require conscience compromises.
Yeah, I think sometimes we have to de-emphasize party. And even...
One more thing. And is there a place for disenfranchisement? Sure. Or do we keep working within a party even if it requires too much of my conscience? Like when do you know I can't do either?
Yeah.
And when do I keep going? Thanks.
So the first thing I would say is that becomes less of a problem if the party isn't part of your identity. As you were saying last night, it may be a tool that you use, but when my party does wrong, that just means I have to say something about it, right? It doesn't make me feel like I've done wrong. It makes me feel like, oh, really? We're going to act like late-term abortion is okay? Well, I have to go out and make sure people know it's not okay. And so when we separate our party from our identity, then you don't feel like you have to agree with everything they do, or that something that comes against them or they do wrong is something you've done wrong, but you do need to counter it, right? So when I vote for somebody, the things I disagree with them on, I can't just support them through everything. I have to be the person that's the first one to go out there and disagree. Number two, I would say, is that not necessarily focusing on partisanship in national politics. As I was saying earlier, there's so much that goes on in a nonpartisan way on the local level. And it's actually more directly impactful than a lot of the things we do on the national level. So sometimes you just got to put the TV away, put MSNBC, Fox News away, and go to your local city council and see what's on the agenda and see what you agree with or what you're doing. One of the things that we're trying to do in Atlanta that's actually bringing the Black traditional church and white evangelicals together is we found an issue that they can both support that's nonpartisan. So we're working on low-income housing and that crisis that we have in many of our cities. Well, we've come together, both those groups. There's no mention of party, but we're still doing good and we're getting wins without being focusing on the partisanship.
Amen. It's good. I wonder if I could ask a variant of your question, brother. You put it in terms of political party. We've seen over the last couple of years the so-called exodus of African American and other sort of ethnic minorities from predominantly white spaces. One brother wrote recently he thought that was reversing. I don't know what he's looking at, because it seems to me it's as steady as it was before. But we're sitting here talking about we the church. And that exodus is in response to, I think, a sense of deep disappointment at not being we the church in some pretty vital times. So I'll start maybe with you, Vincent, and to just sort of come down the line. What would you say about that notion of exodus, how to engage it, how to repair it? Should it be repaired? Should it continue? Just how would you brothers sort of speak into that?
I think we should, it's a great opportunity to ask a question about what our communities are really like and what our communities are actually really saying to people. Because, sort of one of the typical ways that people, or the triggers for people wanting to have an exodus, was they went to church after the 2016 election and nobody said anything. Or nobody said anything negative, right? And they felt, some people said they felt unsafe, they felt unseen, they felt disregarded. There's an opportunity there for communities to say, well, do we really care about all the people in our congregation? And to really think about recalibrating and recasting their approach and the way they're getting to know their congregation. And perhaps getting to the place of courage to expand what their messaging is through what they say and what they don't say. Because I think a lot of people, they want to make the exodus because it's sort of the last straw for them, being disappointed with all the silences that they've experienced in evangelical spaces. So there's opportunity there, but I think it is a very real thing, though I think it's hard to know how much of an exodus it actually is, because this is no different than what happened in the 70s. It's just that there are people who are of a certain age who are experiencing the same thing that Tom Skinner was talking about. So it's not a new thing. When people have had the same frustration, that's been a very consistent thing. It's just that it's flared up, and social media can give us greater attention to a reality that's always been there. People hang around for a while, and then the moment happens. They have toleration for a while, and then some people grin and bear it. Other people say, I'm out. So really, it's the opportunity to say, this thing's been going on. Are we going to seize the opportunity to really be we the church and say, what are we missing?
Russ?
I think if Pharaoh learned anything, it was when you have an exodus, you ought to ask why. And
I love it when Mississippi comes out of you,
Yeah.
brother.
yeah, I don't. I think that the question is right now. It's not just that we have the exodus that you mentioned, which I do think is real. You also have an exodus of young people, as I mentioned in my talk earlier. And what is alarming to me is when I talk to them and ask them why, the answers that I get back. And the answers are not what people think they are, which is, I don't like your stringent sexual ethic. It's that your sexual ethic is not stringent at all. And I think that all of those questions ought to prompt really two different conversations at once. Majority culture conversation within the church of saying, why is this the case? And then within minority cultures, what I find myself saying often is, there are all sorts of places where if you will show up and not give up, not to say that giving up is ever wrong. There are all sorts of places, this is a failed project, I need to move on. But there are all sorts of places where I had one African-American pastor who wasn't going to participate in a particular missions thing one time. He said, I'm tired of all this, I'm going to punish them by leaving. And I said, well, you're not punishing them by leaving. That's what they want you to do. But what really makes the change in this case is to stay. And so I think sometimes that takes a deep sort of conversation of saying, is to be faithful to Jesus, do I need to leave a situation that's toxic and spiritually abusive? Or am I in a situation that's recoverable and redeemable, and what I'm facing is just that sort of dip that has that kind of that pull away from persistence that actually might bring change? And sometimes I think it takes a while to know.
Jonathan, any thoughts, man?
A few. One, it's a point of tremendous sadness for me as I see friends separate and walk into different rooms. That's not saying who's at fault. It's just sad. I hate it. Two, it's a place where we should all, I think, participate in some degree of, and I think especially a majority culture, lamentation for our culpability. Because three, I agree with the indictments Justin made of white conservative spaces in your talk. And so I think there is a primacy of culpability there, and that should be a source of confession and lamentation. 4, Pharaoh didn't ask why, did he? And I continue to think we need to do what Pharaoh didn't do, especially, again, in speaking for majority culture, for myself at least, need to ask why and understand that. So conversations you and I, brother, have had, you talked about how certain white ministries can exasperate colored brothers and sisters. And I said, how?
Did you call us colored?
Black,
I mean, people of color?
people of color. I know, I'm sorry. Forgive me.
It's all good. We're friends. I know I can do that to you.
Well, and in front of people, that's always better. And hide at this point. You're enjoying this. I've lost my train of thought.
We've had conversations.
I said, has 9 Marks done that? Have we exasperated minority brothers and sisters? And you said, yes, at times. I said, how? You said, by your silence. Okay, I see that. I own that. How have I been silent in ways I shouldn't be silent? It's not always, everybody in here knows, it's hard to determine when to be silent, when not to be silent. One shouldn't always speak. One shouldn't always be silent. There's a time and a place for everything, right? And I feel like I lack the wisdom to knowing what time it is now. But I know I've probably been erring in one direction rather than another. And so, as I seek to listen and understand and lament, I need to continue to hear from brothers like you. How can I not be silent? What would it mean to speak and address? And so I'm presently in that learning process. Because there's been times in the past when I've spoken and you said, well, I wouldn't have said that. Okay. All right, let's get better at this. And just to keep trying. So that's what I got.
You are keeping your willingness and ability to keep trying, brother, has only made you a dearer brother to me over the years. And I praise God for you, man. I praise God.
I don't have a whole lot to add. I think all those points are really good. I think we do have to realize that sometimes our narratives protect our pride. And so when we go into conversations about race and things like that, what we're doing is we're going into those conversations on the defensive, right? We're playing self-defense. When we have to go into those conversations in a posture of self-examination, right? Because what we want to do is go into a tough conversation and make sure that our church, our tribe, that we come out of that conversation shiny and new, right? That nobody can blame anything on us. But if you look at how Jesus dealt with people, very few people walked away, if any, from a conversation with Jesus with their narrative intact, right? And so we have to be willing to go into these conversations, and that's both sides, and understand that our narrative might be broken and that we need to fix our narratives and just examine ourselves. And I think that goes for both sides. I think majority Christians certainly need to deal with the kind of hubris and pride that doesn't allow you to hear people out. But then sometimes, I mean, obviously, if you're in a very toxic situation, sometimes you have to leave. But I also know folks who say, well, I'm just not going there because I don't have anything to say to them or anything else. Well, that can be prideful too, right? That could be you saying, you know what, I don't think you're going to listen to me, so I'm not going to waste my time and do that. Was that a matter of your pride? Or did Martin Luther King and Fannie Lou Hamer and go whoever was going to listen, especially to the people who could make a change? So what sense does it make for me to only preach to the choir when I need to go to the other side of the tracks and have them hear me, whether they give me a chance or not? That's kind of sort of what evangelism is about to a certain extent. And so I think we need to apply the same principles.
Can I add one thing real quick that was triggered by what he said is that I think one of the things that people need to be willing to do perpetually, and it's really hard, is to sort of make reference to this thing that Henry wrote in 47, is to actually have a perpetually uneasy conscience. And to be and not where you want to have an uneasy conscience. Everybody says, search me, O Lord, and a lot of times what they really mean is, search me where I'm okay having you speak to me. But search me actually where I really want to kind of have all the walls up. No, blow those up. That's a really hard thing for people to do, but I think that's one of the things that needs to happen.
Amen. That's a good word. Mark, I want to give you this sort of last word before we dismiss for lunch. You can speak to this question of the Exodus, if you like, but I think you're right now the sort of only currently serving pastor up here, and you've led your congregation into these waters. So I wonder if you have any wisdom to share with pastors here who are hearing this and thinking, I need to bring some of this back to my folks, or with members here who are thinking, I don't think my pastor is where these folks are or where I am, but I want to have some influence. What sort of pastoral wisdom would you give folks for brokering these conversations?
Yeah, I'll try. When these guys were sharing, I was thinking that I don't know a whole lot about systems, church ecclesiastical systems. I know about like trying to help a local church, and I think what's true of politics is also true of just human systems, that the exodus at a maybe larger level is symptomatic of an exodus at a local church level. And so true transformation is going to come not just at the ecclesiastical large group setting, but even at the local church setting, and frankly, even the local home setting. And so one of the things that we have found is that the relationships, for instance, the civil rights vision trip, one of the beautiful things that happens in that is people, when they're traveling on a bus together for 4 days and they're praying and they're living in spaces that are just difficult and awkward, when there's tension, like we stopped at a cotton field, and how our white brothers and sisters process that versus our black brothers and sisters. I mean, I still grieve over the fact that that moment is so different, and like we had to have some reconciliation happen, and but leaning into those relationships are really, really important. Then people become friends, and then later on in the evening, we're in a big barbecue place in Birmingham, laughing our heads off after we were just at a really awkward and very tense moment. And so I think that's what the church is. I love you in your yuck, and I love you when we're enjoying food together, but we're actually doing both together. And that our people have those kind of relationships. And we didn't set out as a church to explore this conversation. It found us because of some faithful African American brothers and sisters who said, I want to go and be fed and worship, but I'd also like to see this church grow. And they were missionaries in many respects, painfully so, and had to endure a lot. And over time, we began to hear them differently. And that's been really beautiful, but it's been also really, really hard and really painful. And what keeps, I think, those brothers and sisters there is not how excited they are every time with if I'm on message or if I'm speaking the right language, because I miss it all the time. But it's, I don't want to leave my brothers and sisters. And that relationship glue causes you to cover the multitude of sins and also causes an unwillingness to step away. And I think somehow we got to figure out how to do that better, and then also help our minority brothers and sisters know we love you for who you are. You're not my diversity consultant, right? And so I'm discipling a guy, an African American guy, and I told him we're going to sit down, we're going to talk about Jesus, family, and everything else. We're not going to talk about diversity because you get enough of that. And so I just want to love you as my brother, as a man, as a husband, and I think those kind of conversations are really helpful and cause people to put roots down. And then finally, just being patient, that the difference in culture and different spaces is hard and traumatic. So I was at a worship service where I was the only white guy in the room. One of our staff guys took me to a traditional service on a Wednesday afternoon, and I felt tension inside my soul that I couldn't explain, couldn't describe. And I thought, man, this is how my minority brothers and sisters feel in my space. It's just, I don't feel that ever. And it helped me to be more sensitive and patient with some of the angst that they feel every single Sunday. And why someone looking at them sideways, I might think, that's just people. And they're like, yeah, that hurts, because it's like the 300th time I've seen that. And so listening to that, I think, is really important. So those are just pastorally on-the-ground issues of helping everyone uniquely, who has an individually unique story, and to be okay with that they're not, white folks aren't monolithic, black folks aren't monolithic, right? And so just understanding that all of us have had different experiences and being wise about how we approach that, and doing it with humility and a lot of grace.
Can I add two quick things to that? For lay people, some of you are going to say, well, my pastor doesn't get whatever it is that you're dealing with. What I would counsel you is a lot of times when you come to your pastor and say, would you do this, that, or the other? What he hears is literally, would you do this, that, or the other? A better way is to approach your pastor with something that you want to do and that you are willing to lead. And often you'll be surprised at how your pastor will actually get on board with that vision if you do it that way. Second thing is for pastors, and particularly for white pastors, biggest obstacle other than the refusal to bear one another's burdens is fear. And you can see people who are willing to preach really hard against sin as long as it's the sins approved by the people in their congregation. But they're fearful if they speak the whole counsel of God that you're going to have somebody who's going to come up and they'll call you a liberal, they'll call you a communist, they'll call you whatever, and they will. They really will.
Is there a story there or something?
There are so many stories to tell, and they
got
will be
time.
told. But the fundamental issue is, if you are a servant of Jesus Christ and live out the obedience that Jesus has given to you, and you expand your audience to say, I am not the approval of whatever group of people I have in front of me right now. I am approved of or disapproved of by Jesus Christ and that great cloud of witnesses. That will give you the power to overcome fear. And often, what God wants you to do is not only to suffer for bearing someone else's burdens, but sometimes what God wants you to do is to take whatever comes your way, and sometimes you survive. You're crucified with Christ. So nothing else is a bad day after that.
Amen. Amen. I want to do two things real quick, and then we'll be off for lunch. I mentioned that one of our sponsors is Lifeway. They had hoped to get some books here to us to give to you all, but because of the situation with the tornado in Nashville, they're unable to ship the books. And Marsha Pursley, wonderful sister there, the events coordinator with Lifeway, says, but I still want to do something. And I think you'll be pleased with the something that they've done. Downstairs in the exhibitor hall on the table is a stack of papers. These papers are also Lifeway's gift to you. It is a link where you can go and download 50 books for your library. You don't even have to pay to ship them home. They'll be right there on your laptop. 50 ebooks as a part of their word search platform that they want to offer to everyone at the conference. And so please go down, meet with the exhibitors, pick up your books, this paper, grab some lunch or grab it when you come back from lunch. But praise God for Lifeway and their generosity to us. Amen. And then also just help me thank God again for these brothers who have served us this morning. We'll see you back here at 2.
Brother, that was so epic, man. I had folks at home blowing my phone up. Like, are you in that room?